Comers, you'll just have to join in at whatever point we're at. So welcome to this webinar focused on data modeling and whether or not visual data modeling is better than code-based data modeling. My name is Paul Watson-Gover, one of the senior solutions architects at WhereScape. I have been working for them for a total of about 12 years. I originally started out as a customer. Before that, I was a customer for 6 years before joining them. So what we're going to do is take a quick walk through one of our products, but more on that shortly. For those of you who are not familiar, a quick overview of who WhereScape are. Been around since around about 2001, so 25 years now in the data warehouse automation space. We got more into modeling a little later than that. Can't remember exactly when that was. It's probably around about 10 years ago. And our key offering is to try and de-risk projects by providing solutions that help you design and build your data warehouse initiatives as quickly and consistently as possible, primarily through generation of native code for your target database platforms. Okay, sorry, I just saw something pop up in the chat there, which took me off my flow a little bit. So how we do that is via our two products. We have WhereScape 3D, which is our design tool. We have WhereScape Red, which is our build tool. Across these two products, we support a wide variety of modeling methodologies. So whatever your chosen methodology is, we can support it with various levels of automation. I'm not going to go too deep into all of that because that's not the focus of this particular webinar. But it's suffice to say that our products are flexible enough that you could invent your own modeling style, and we would be able to support that. It's all driven by metadata. It's all underpinned by metadata. And on top of that metadata sits a template engine. And through those various templates and the metadata, that enables us to generate objects, models, code for just about anything. That metadata also means that everything is always documented. And particularly then when using Red for building, we also have a scheduler for orchestration. Now today, we'll be focusing on the left-hand side of this diagram, looking at 3D because we're talking about modeling. And we'll have a look at some of the options around the metadata for when you're modeling with 3D. Now, the title of this webinar is around whether visual data modeling is better than code-based data modeling. So what do we mean by that? Well, through the rise of certain things like DBT, for example, you can end up with something like this, a number of files in a directory structure. And this, for some reason, seems to get called a model. It's a reason that some reasons I don't understand. But for me, this doesn't really give you any kind of picture of what it is you're modeling, what you're building, what the flow of data is through your warehouse. So I would say that no, this is not a model, but this could well be an output from a model. And that's one of the key things about our modeling tool, our design tool, is that you're not just designing and building models for the sake of it. They are actually useful. You can take the metadata in those models and use it to do other things, such as, if you wished, output all these SQL files and YAML files. So this is obviously more traditionally what you would think of as a model. This is obviously a very simple representation of a star schema, but is still a model nonetheless. So now let's jump into 3D and look at the way we get to something like this. So I'll switch across to WhereScape 3D. 3D actually stands for data-driven design. the idea behind 3D was to sort of move away from this old modeling paradigm that used to exist in the data warehouse space, inherited from the OLTP space, where you would gather some requirements, give those requirements to a so-called data modeler. They would disappear off into a dark room and build a model in a tool like Irwin or Power Designer or something, having never seen the source data or have any understanding really of how the business works. They would produce a model, and surprise, surprise, when the data engineers tried to build it, the data generally didn't fit that model. So what WhereScape did was said, well, hey, let's come up with our own new way of looking at this problem, where we will start by connecting to the sources, doing a bit of investigation around them. And this means that as we start to build out our design, our model, we can validate as we go. So we know that the final model that we output is validated and that the source data will fit that model to meet the end user's requirements. And so that's why in 3D we have a connection object. Now these connections can be to various different things. It could be database sources. It could be, as you can see, I've got one here for Amazon S3 bucket. I've got a BigQuery one here. I've got a connection to the local file system. I've also got a Azure Data Lake connection, so that we can also source from APIs or connect to APIs via this tool. Now, for the sake of speed and simplicity, as we walk through this process, I'm just going to connect to a local SQL Server database. But obviously, if you wanted to find out more about other options, that could be done separate to this webinar. So I've got a source design here for Northwind, but what I'll actually do is create a new model, which I will call webinar, and I will make it version 1 and choose my connection to use for this, which will be this Northwind connection. So the first thing that happens here is it lists the schemas that are available in that database. The DBO schema is already selected because it's just the obvious one there. You wouldn't be looking to use the information schema or the sys schema. I'll leave these defaults set for discovery and profiling and talk more about those in a moment. So when I click next, I'm asked what type of discovery do I want to do, and I'll say a full discovery, and I'll also run a full profile, which will just take a few seconds because there's not much data in there. And if I display that diagram, we can see my model has been discovered. So what this has done is, via a series of queries, it has gone off and queried the underlying system tables in this database to grab the metadata and render that as an ERD. Now, because this is a pretty well-structured source database, the primary and foreign key relationships are all defined. So that means they're all displayed here nicely and I can see them. So this is what my source system looks like. Now I can follow this similar process if I was discovering some files in a data lake or an S3 bucket and so on. The difference then is I probably wouldn't see any relationships. Well, I definitely wouldn't see any relationships because those files don't tend to have relationships. But once you've got to this type of model, you can then start to add those things in. So for example, if I was missing a relationship between customers and orders, I can just draw it in if I know what it is, right? I can, so I could just drag from one to the other and create a relationship. Some other options I have is I can attempt to derive them by going through a series of criteria. The most important one being this table join criteria here, where I can use some things like fuzzy matching to do some manipulation of column names or table names and have a go at deriving those relationships. So that could be useful as well. Another option, just as we do a bit of a deep dive into discovery here, would be to create a custom discovery method that would handle other scenarios. So as an example of that, I once worked with a customer who had SAP as a source. They had no referential integrity, but what they did have was a table in the database that contained all of the relationship information. So I was able to include that in the discovery and generate a full ERD like this one by including that particular table as part of the metadata discovery for that database. So there are lots of ways to get to this point, but it's quite an important one for getting to understand your sources, and so that you can then start to work with the business on designing out your end target models. So the other thing I ran during that process was data profiling. Now, just to be clear, we're not trying to be a data profiling tool. There are some sophisticated tools out there for data profiling, but it is an important thing to do, even at a high level. So if I show some data profiling results here, as part of this process, let's say I've been asked to do some look at building some analysis around customer region, for example. And I see that we have a region attribute in this customer table. And over here, I can look at the different profiling metrics. Let's say I click on null percentage and then highlight region and see that customer region is null 65% of the time. So, you know, even this fairly unsophisticated look at the data tells me that customer region is not a good thing to be looking at, right? So if you want to be reporting on customers by region, you need to go back and fix this data. So the benefits of that is that, number one, I don't waste time building something that's not going to add much value to my end users. And number two, I can actually obviously feed that back to my end users, and they can go off and make sure that that data is fixed. You know, I don't try and fix it in the data. I feed this back to them and say, go and look at your source system. Your region information is not being captured. You need to look at why that's not happening. And then perhaps we can revisit this. For now, let's go and focus on something else. Okay. So as I said, high-level profiling, yes, but potentially very useful. You can also output all of that information into a document. So maybe you're working somewhere where you've never had any documentation around your sources. You have no understanding of what the data looks like in those sources. You can simply right-click on a version, generate the documentation, and if you document the model, you can include the profiling metrics as you go through the process and output those into a document or into a static website that the end user would be able to take a look at. Now, another thing around discovery of source models and documentation is to do with understanding changes that have happened. If you've ever attempted to build some kind of data warehouse on top of sources that are changing underneath you, you will know that it's a very tricky thing to do. In particular, if there's nobody who really has any ownership of what those changes are. And I've certainly been there myself, where the only way I found out that something had changed would be when my downstream process broke. And unfortunately, that happened to me as a WhereScape consultant before 3D existed. Had 3D have existed, what I would have done is discovered that source every day and then run this structure comparison of the two model versions and output a document that shows me exactly what has changed since the last time I discovered it. All of this can also be scheduled as well, so that would have been really handy. I could have turned up in the morning and had a report essentially of anything that had changed overnight while the developers were busy changing the underlying sources to break my downstream processes. So that's a bit about discovery and profiling. Started to touch on documentation there. You know, documentation is a very important thing. If we go into any particular object in here, if there is any useful information, any stuff that could be useful for governance, or any metadata that has been added at the table or the column level or relationship level in the underlying source, that will be pulled through automatically. But you also have the ability to introduce custom documentation fields at both the table and column level. So here you can start to capture lots of additional information. This helps to do away with that siloed knowledge problem where all the knowledge lives in one person's head. So you can start to get that out of them, get it into this documentation and have it always there. Equally, of course, data governance tools are there for that purpose these days as well. And what you can also do is interrogate your data governance tools and pull that information into here if needed, or even push the data from here into your governance tools. So you can build a kind of two-way bridge and keep both things up to date, regardless of where somebody's entering that information. Okay, so with the source system or systems discovered and profiled, you can start to think about your designs, what it is you're looking to actually design. And that can be any number of things. Now, there are various methods for approaching this. We don't push anybody down any one particular route. So if you want to start at a conceptual level with your business users, so very, very high level, you can do that. You could then go from there to a logical, or you could start at a logical level if that makes more sense to you. Now, if you want to design something like a data vault, well, then there is additional functionality built into the tool that can help you do that. So we do that via what we call model conversion rules, and that allows you to augment either a source model or a logical model with some additional metadata, and then that can then be used to automatically generate additional models. So the use of the various different techniques really depends on what it is you're trying to achieve, what type of model you're looking to build, whether you need to take advantage of that level of automation, or whether you just want to design things manually, which is also fine, depending on what you're doing. So just to show you a quick example, if I take this logical design, and obviously some people are into data vaults. So if I generate a data vault model, I won't go into whether you should or shouldn't do that. It's entirely up to you. But the point is, you can use that metadata to drive out additional models where that methodology supports that kind of thing. And this is one example of that. Okay, so I'm not going to go into detail about that. This is not a data vault webinar. This is just merely showing you the model conversion capabilities that are built into 3D. And again, if you want to find out more, please do reach out and we'll dive into more detail. So that's one way. Another way of creating your model is to just do it manually, or so-called manually, although there's still plenty of automation added to this process. So if I add the model version to my star schema category display, you can see it starts off with some predefined entities. I will just hide this one because I don't need it. And here I could start to do some manual designing. So if I go back to my webinar source, and then based on the discovery and profiling that I've done early on in the process, if I grab, say, the customers table, because I have understood that that's going to become a dimension, I'll remove the S. I can say I want to have a table type of dimension I can click OK, and then I get this dim customer. Now, what happened there? Well, what happened was, based on the settings in the entity types, I have this dimension entity type, and in here is a template for my dimension. So again, customizable. All right, you decide what goes in there. There's that naming convention that's been applied. The foreign key or the surrogate key that's been added has this suffix added, and any indexes would be suffixed with IDX. And it's also set up to automatically add some technical columns and a couple of indexes. Right, so that gets configured at this level so that when I create an object, I get, for example, this key column here, the surrogate key column, and this update time technical column. So that's my dimension template being applied to an object that I created from my source by dragging and dropping it in. Now, because I've done that, it means I've always got lineage from my table. And in fact, if I was to go into that object, add another source from a different model. So let's say I just pick one of my old North Wind discoveries, just for simplicity. And I map that onto there. I now have two sources. And so my documentation, my metadata, my lineage is always up to date and always current. As you can see, I now have two sources going back to these two different source systems. Ultimately, they're coming from the same connection in this case, because obviously I'm keeping it simple. Now, what I will, so now that I could obviously repeat for other objects. So maybe I would want a products dimension or whatever. I can drag and drop that in. I can also go fully manual if I wish. So I could create a table for product. You can see it's automatically applying a naming convention. I've set my naming convention to make my table names uppercase. So that's automatically being applied. I can say I want this to be of type dimension. And there, all I have there then is the basic template with my name that I decided on, and my surrogate key and timestamp column for the last time that record was updated or inserted. And then I can go in and I can start to map a source onto there. So if I go to my webinar source, I'll choose my products table. Now that source is mapped. But what I could also do is, rather than just use the column names that are there, maybe I want to implement a different naming convention. This might be the same as the one that's there, but I could add a new column called product name, decide where I want that to go, and then at that point I come and map onto my target object from the source. And so if I wanted to go through that manually that way, I can do that. Again, also from here, if I just want to add a column, I can add it by dragging and dropping on there. So I could build this up manually. I'm just going to have to change that because it's messing with my OCD. So there we go. I now have a very simple product dimension that I designed from scratch rather than by dragging and dropping in. What I can then do, because I'm building a dimensional model up here, is I'll just quickly build something that looks a bit like a fact table. I'll go and add another table into here. So I'll add a second table. So this would have a join on the order ID. And now I can add the relationship to my product. He says, where's my product ID gone? Where's my product ID gone? I didn't add it, that's why. From my source, And now I can go and create that relationship as well. Okay. And now if I want those surrogate keys added to my fact table, I can tell it to go ahead and create those artificial keys in my fact table as well. Just to get everything a bit better lined up, I will reorder those attributes. And so as you can see, that is the process then of building out a design. And then, hold on. Okay, yeah. All right, I see there's a couple of questions in there. I'll come back to those shortly. So obviously, that is a start of a design, which I can then continue to build up. Now, I mentioned the fact that all of this is metadata, and behind that is a template engine for generating code. If I come into this table and go to the data warehouse query and generate the query, we can see it generates this select statement for me, including the join, which is based on the information in the source model. So again, if this was based on something that didn't originally have that information there, but I've added it to my source model, then I can generate this information here. Now, what that means is as well, that if I wanted to output this as a SQL file or as some other kind of file to be consumed by whatever product, I can use this template as a basis and output any particular file format that I wish. Right, I'll just jump into these questions, seeing as they are there. So I have a couple here. One from Slavek, include simple curate. Your example includes simple curated models. Yes, that's true. This is a simple curated model because we don't have a lot of time. If you wanted to see something of hundreds or thousands of tables, we could certainly look at that in a dedicated session, but that's not really for this session. So apologies for that, Slavek, but happy to pick that up with you in a subsequent session. If we have the same customer ID from different sources, such as ERP and CRM, how can we handle such kind of duplicate business keys in WhereScape? At which level of data modeling should we handle this issue? Well, obviously that depends is the answer to that question. It depends on what type of model you're looking to store them in. Is 101 the same business key, or is it two different things from the two different systems? Obviously, in most cases, you would need an additional identifier to store alongside that. You know, in things like a data vault modeling, you have this concept of the name is just escaping my head at the moment. I've completely forgotten what it's called. The collision key. Sorry, you have the collision key, which you can use to help resolve these kinds of things. They can also be resolved outside of your warehouse process if you're using. Oh my God! I'm sorry. I'm having another moment here where I'm forgetting the terms. You might do this outside of the warehouse, where you're working out your golden record before you bring that in as a source of data. So it really depends. We can handle it any way that is required to be handled, through whether that's through design or whether that's through the code generation. It really just it depends. There's not one answer to that. We can handle it in any way that fits your environment. Okay, somebody just dropping off. That's also okay, fine. Yeah. So I mean, I hope that's answered your questions well enough. If not, I'm more than happy to discuss those further. in a further session. So I've completely lost my inflow now. Yeah. So obviously, what I'm doing here is building up a simple model, just working on my own. However, that's also not overly realistic. In the real world, you would collaborate across multiple users, and we're certainly geared up for that. We do have Git integration so that you can version these models into a Git repository if you so desire. If you're in a smaller team, you can sort of replicate some of that functionality directly in the tool by creating versions. So if this was essentially a main branch, if you think of it in Git terms, I can create another one by copying it. I can work on that model, and then I can merge those changes back into another model and decide which changes win and which lose and so on. Very similar to the Git process, but that's all handled within 3D. Now, that's not how everybody wants to work. Many people will prefer to output these models to a Git repository and handle the conflicts that way. I don't have that configured for this repository, so I can't work through that now. Okay, so what we've tried to go through there is a quick overview of how you can use WhereScape 3D to build out your designs, end up with your desired target model, one that you know is validated based on your available source systems, which you can then also very quickly take to the business users, the end users, and discuss with them and come back and make changes as necessary. You can collaborate with teammates. You can make sure you're working on the right things by doing that upfront discovery and profiling step. So what we've tried to get across there is this concept of data-driven design, going from sources, understanding them, mitigating the risk of what you're attempting to build by going through that whole understanding process. What this does, what it gives you is the ability to validate your model as you go, remain abstracted from source, but having a target model that is ready to accept source data. You've got usable metadata that again can be abstracted from source systems and used to output in many different formats. It will be target platform agnostic. You can potentially auto-generate any models that you want, and it's more than just a model. And that is the key to this, really. It is more than just a model. It's not just a picture. Behind that model is metadata, and that metadata can be used for many different purposes. That can be used to push to our other tool, WhereScape Red, to then have those things built. It could be used to output SQL files. It could be used to integrate with DBT, for example, outputting YAML files and SQL files that DBT needs, and giving you that visual layer up front. Because if you are going down this code-driven approach, I'm a firm believer that you still need an overview of your model. You still need to understand what it is you're going from, what it is you're going to. You need to be able to visualize that in order to properly deliver any kind of useful target model. And that's what a tool like 3D can give you. It can give you all of that governance over the whole model across the enterprise, but you can still use it to deliver those technical artifacts that you need to actually build it. And that's important. So any modeling tool that doesn't allow you to do that just doesn't really serve much of a purpose, in my opinion. So the final question there on the chat, do we have Git integration in 3D? Yes, we do. Git integration is available. Again, if you'd like to find out more about that, then get in touch, request a demo. We'd be more than happy to go into a deeper dive. on any of the topics that have been covered today, or indeed on any other topics, or if you wish to see more of 3D in action with Red and actually building out target structures, we'd be happy to walk through that as well. So I'll just hold on for a minute. Any other questions? Please do put them in the chat. Otherwise, we will wrap this up shortly. Okay, there is one more question that's come in. Can we create conceptual model from conceptual to logical and from logical to physical data
Here's
model?
what I found.
Automatically. Yes, the short answer is yes. I do actually have an example of that in this repository. So if I click on one of these conceptual models, I don't think it was that one. That's not a conceptual model. I think it was this one. So here is a very, obviously very basic conceptual model. Well, that may not even have been that one. No, can't remember. But anyway, over here is some workflow buttons where you can use it to carry out a number of different tasks. And if I go and change this workflow, which I can't find now, I shouldn't be doing this live. The short answer is yes, you can program the tool to generate from a conceptual model, a logical model, and then logical to physical at the click of a button. I just can't remember which model I've configured to do that. But it's done via a workflow over here. Behind that is a script that pushes it down through the stages to get you to your physical model. Differences. What about differences / compare and then syncing the models? Are you talking about merging there? Okay, fine. Yes, so what I need to do would be to find some that I could compare. So if I compare those, you can see then this is the result of a comparison. And this is where you're kind of deciding what to keep, what to add, what to ignore, and so on as you merge those things together. So that's kind of, you can think of that similar to conflict management in Git when you're attempting to merge branches. It's a similar concept to that, but it's done via this interface where you decide what to keep, what to get rid of, and what to just ignore altogether. And essentially what it will do then is merge my model 100, as you can see up here, into my model 10. So if model 10 was my main model, my main branch, if you want to use that terminology, then this would merge into there. Does it have a repository for the models too? Yeah, so everything, every version, every model is metadata in the repository. The repository is open, so you can connect to it. It's your repository, it's your metadata. So all the models are in there. Equally, you can export the models as XML currently. So it's how they get exported. That's also how the Git integration works. We export XML files up to the Git repository, and then those are used for the comparison. Okay. Any more, or is that it? Okay. Don't seem to be any more questions coming in. So I will simply say thank you, everybody, for your time today. If you do wish to get in touch, please do. And as I said, we will happily take a deep dive into any topic that you wish. Yes, I believe there will be a recording link sent out later on. So one final time, I'll say thank you, everybody, and goodbye, and enjoy the rest of your day.